Stranded on my small, quiet island, the last thing I expected was an alien crash landing, let alone one who greeted me with, "Nice tools, human." It was supposed to be another quiet evening on the island. I was sharpening a fishing spear, half watching the sun sink into the waves, when the sky exploded. A fiery streak cut through the horizon, lighting up the ocean like it was midday. I dropped my spear and squinted, trying to make sense of it. A meteor, maybe? A plane crash? But planes don't hum like that. The sound was eerie, a low, vibrating tone that made my chest feel tight. I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the noise, stumbling over rocks and tangled roots as I followed the smoke trail to the far side of the island. When I reached the clearing, I froze. In the middle of a small crater stood something that looked like a cross between a pod and a giant metallic egg. It was scorched, hissing, and glowing faintly in the moonlight. And then the hatch opened. She stepped out. Tall, glowing faintly blue, with strange markings running down her arms and legs, she looked like she'd stepped straight out of one of those alien abduction stories I used to read as a kid. Except this wasn't fiction. Her hair shimmered like liquid silver, her eyes were too large for her face, and her outfit, well, if you could call it that, barely covered anything. I froze, flashlight shaking in my hand, unsure whether to scream, run, or faint. She tilted her head, looking at me like I was the weird one. "Primitive life form," she said, her voice surprisingly smooth. "Male. Adequate physique. Are you the local apex predator?" I blinked. No," she frowned, stepping closer. "You don't seem particularly evolved, though your tools suggest rudimentary intelligence." I glanced at the flashlight in my hand. "This? It's just a flashlight." She snatched it from me, twisting it in her hands with a look of fascination. "Illumination device. Crude. Effective. Acceptable for mating rituals." "Mating what?" I stammered, backing up as she leaned in. Her eyes scanned me, uncomfortably thorough. "You are compatible," she said with a matter-of-fact tone that sent my brain into overdrive. "Your species emits strong reproductive pheromones. This will suffice." "Okay, hold on," I said, waving my hands. "Who are you? What are you doing here? And what do you mean, suffice?" She sighed, like I was the one being difficult. "Crash landing. Failed navigation. Stranded. You, temporary companion until communication is restored." "Companion?" My voice cracked. She tilted her head again, her expression unreadable. "You do not wish to participate? Participate in what?" I was almost afraid to ask. She stepped back, looking genuinely puzzled for the first time. "Your kind has an unusual hesitation toward reproductive activities. Is this cultural? Genetic? Or are you defective?" "Defective?" I nearly choked. "Lady, I don't even know your name." She blinked, then smiled, a sharp, almost predatory smile. "Name. Right. I am Isara. You may address me as such. Now, proceed with the local bonding ritual." "I don't think we're on the same page here," I said, my voice higher pitched than I liked. "Bonding rituals? We're not. This isn't. Look, maybe we should focus on fixing your pod or something." Isara glanced back at the smoking wreckage like she'd forgotten it was there. "Non-functional. Requires time for recalibration. In the meantime, I will observe your primitive habits. Perhaps they have merit." She walked past me, scanning the area like a tourist on a safari. I stood there, dumbfounded, trying to process the fact that an alien woman had just crash-landed on my island and was now casually inspecting my coconut trees. "You call this home?" she asked, gesturing at my small hut with an expression that could only be described as unimpressed. "Yes," I said, still clutching my flashlight like it was a lifeline. "It's cozy. Small. Inefficient," she said, walking inside without waiting for an invitation. She ran a glowing finger along the rough wooden table, examining the dust it picked up. "You lack sanitation units. Curious." "Hey, I make do," I said, following her in. It's not exactly a luxury resort, but it works. She turned to me, her glowing eyes narrowing. And yet you survive. Fascinating. Perhaps your species is more adaptable than it appears. I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already tugging at the straps of her outfit. Whoa, what are you doing? I yelped, averting my eyes. Removing restrictive garments, she said matter-of-factly. Your planet's atmosphere is dense. Optimal skin exposure required for regulation. This is not that kind of island, I said, my voice almost a squeak. You can't just, look, can you please put that back on? She sighed, clearly unimpressed with my outburst, but she complied. Humans. So many unnecessary rules. You don't say. I muttered, dragging a hand down my face. Isara settled onto my hammock like she owned the place, her silver hair spilling over the edges. I will remain here until the pod repairs itself. You will provide sustenance, shelter, and entertainment. Entertainment? She looked at me with a completely straight face. Do you not perform dances or vocalizations for your mates? How else do you attract partners? I gawked at her, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or throw myself into the ocean. This was going to be a long night. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of crashing pots and a smell that could only be described as burnt confusion. Rushing outside, I found Isara standing over my makeshift stove, holding what used to be breakfast. She turned to me, holding a charred piece of fish with a proud grin. I attempted your primitive cooking ritual, she said, handing it over like a trophy. Your methods are inefficient, but I have improved them. The fish was blackened to the point of being unrecognizable. Improved? This thing looks like it survived a volcano. She frowned, inspecting the fish as though it had betrayed her. Your fire-based techniques lack precision. My species uses molecular restructuring for sustenance. Your methods are quaint, yet unnecessarily destructive. Thanks for the feedback, I said, taking the fish just to stop her from experimenting further. Maybe let me handle the cooking from now on. She shrugged and wandered off to examine my tool shed, which she treated like an exhibit at an alien zoo. Every time I glanced over, she was holding up a wrench or a saw, muttering things like, "This is for defensive mating, yes?" Or, "How does this not harm your appendages?" By mid-afternoon, we'd settled into an awkward rhythm. Isara was curious about everything but seemed to lack basic common sense. She'd stick her hand into a beehive to test the local insect life, or try to chew on a coconut without opening it. I couldn't decide if she was fearless or just completely insane. Why do you continue to glare at me when I am conducting research? She asked, pulling her hand out of the hive with surprising calmness. Her arm glowed faintly as the bee stings disappeared before my eyes. I'm not glaring. I'm just wondering why you keep trying to kill yourself, I said, tossing her a coconut knife. Here, use this before you break your teeth. She examined the knife with childlike curiosity before finally opening the coconut. You are surprisingly useful for a species so underdeveloped. Gee, thanks, I muttered, but she wasn't listening. The afternoon was filled with more misunderstandings. When I asked her to help with fishing, she walked into the water and started slapping at fish with her bare hands. Somehow, she managed to catch 3 of them, and she proudly declared, "Your tools are unnecessary. My reflexes are superior." Yeah, well, some of us like not getting pinched by crabs, I said, wincing as she stepped on one with a loud crunch. Her curiosity extended to relationships too, which made for some of the most awkward conversations of my life. Explain why you have not yet produced offspring, she asked suddenly, as we ate lunch. I nearly choked on my fish. What? That's kind of personal, don't you think? It is relevant to my research, she said, as if that made it any better. Your species seems overly concerned with emotional bonding before reproduction. Is this a survival mechanism? It's not just about survival, I said, my face heating. People connect. They care about each other. It's not just biology. She tilted her head, watching me like I was some kind of experiment. Curious. My species eliminates emotional attachments. They are considered inefficient. Yet you persist with this illogical practice. It's not illogical, I snapped. It's what makes us human. She leaned closer, studying my face like she was trying to find the hidden manual for human behavior. You are strange, but not unappealing. I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted. Thanks, I guess? Her questions didn't stop there. Later, as we gathered firewood, she suddenly asked, "How does one attract a mate in your culture? Is there a specific dance or vocalization?" I laughed nervously, trying to dodge the question. "It's a little more complicated than that." She frowned. "Complication reduces efficiency. Why complicate reproduction with unnecessary rituals?" "Because it's not just about reproduction," I said, exasperated. "It's about finding someone who gets you, who you want to spend your life with." Her frown deepened as she seemed to process this. Lifelong bonds unnecessary. Yet intriguing. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. By evening, I was ready to collapse, but Isara seemed tireless. She spent hours tinkering with my radio, trying to boost its signal. She claimed it would help her interface with the mothership, but all she managed to do was pick up static and the occasional commercial jingle. "This technology is primitive," she muttered, slamming the radio down. "How do you tolerate such inefficiency?" "By being patient," I said, taking the radio before she broke it. "And by knowing when to take a break." She gave me a skeptical look but followed me outside to watch the sunset. "You humans are illogical," she said after a long silence. "But your persistence is admirable." "Thanks," I said, not sure if that was a compliment or another thinly veiled insult. She tilted her head, studying the horizon. "Perhaps there is value in your methods, though your emotional attachments remain perplexing. Maybe you'll figure it out," I said, leaning back and letting the quiet of the evening settle over us. For the first time, she didn't reply. Instead, she just sat there, watching the sunset like she was trying to understand something she couldn't quite grasp. It was the most peaceful moment we'd had all day. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. Isara's curiosity never waned, and neither did her ability to make everything feel awkward. She'd trail me while I worked, asking questions that no one with common sense would ever ask. "Why do you wear clothing if it does not enhance your physical capabilities?" she asked one morning as I was repairing a fishing net. "Because it's normal," I said, glancing at her shimmering, barely there outfit. "It's about modesty." She tilted her head. "Modesty? Another unnecessary human complication. Does it improve mating success?" I groaned. "It's not about mating. It's cultural." She nodded thoughtfully, then picked up one of my shirts and inspected it like it was some rare artifact. "Your species creates coverings to hide vulnerability." "Interesting." "Inefficient, but interesting." I didn't bother correcting her. There was no point. Things took a turn when she started asking about emotions. She seemed genuinely baffled by the way humans operated. "Explain jealousy," she said one afternoon while we were collecting firewood. "Jealousy?" I repeated, caught off guard. "Yes. I have observed your reactions. When I mention mating efficiency, you appear agitated. Is this jealousy?" "I'm not jealous," I snapped, maybe a little too quickly. She raised an eyebrow, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Denial. Another inefficient behavior." "Explain." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's not that simple. Jealousy happens when you care about someone and feel threatened by someone else's attention to them. It's not logical, but it's human." She frowned, processing this. "So you care about me?" My face burned. "That's not. Look, let's just focus on getting the firewood, okay?" She didn't press the issue, but I could feel her watching me, like she was dissecting me with her eyes. Later that evening, as we sat by the fire, she brought it up again. "Humans form bonds based on emotions, not just compatibility," she said, more to herself than to me. "This is unusual." "Unusual isn't bad," I said, poking at the fire. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. You find value in these bonds? Yeah, I said, my voice softening. They make life worth living. She seemed to consider this, her glowing markings dimming slightly. Perhaps there is merit in this illogical practice. The conversation lingered in my mind long after we'd gone to bed. There was something vulnerable about her in that moment, something that made her seem less like an alien and more like someone trying to figure out her place in the universe. The next day, things took an even stranger turn. Isara decided to help me with building a new storage shed, which was a disaster waiting to happen. She had no concept of patience or precision, and her strength was almost comical. Human tools are inadequate, she said, snapping a plank in half with one hand. Maybe stop using them like a wrecking ball, I muttered, trying to salvage what was left of the woodpile. She ignored me, grabbing a hammer and nails. This process is inefficient. Allow me to improve it. Before I could stop her, she pressed her glowing hand to the wood, and it fused together like magic. That's not bad, I admitted, impressed despite myself. Of course not, she said, smirking. My methods are superior. Her confidence was both frustrating and endearing, and I found myself laughing despite the chaos. That night, we shared another quiet moment by the fire. She seemed different, less analytical, more thoughtful. You laugh often, she said suddenly. It's called having a sense of humor, I said. You should try it sometime. She tilted her head. Humor. Another human trait I do not fully understand. Humor makes life easier, I said. Even when things are hard, it helps you get through. She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Perhaps I have been too rigid in my understanding of existence. It wasn't exactly a heartfelt confession, but it felt like progress. By now, I was starting to see her in a different light. She wasn't just some alien stranded on my island. She was someone who was learning, adapting, and maybe even growing. And, as much as I hated to admit it, I was growing too. She caught me staring at her later that night and raised an eyebrow. You are observing me again, she said. Just thinking, I said, looking away. About mating compatibility? She asked with a teasing smirk. No, I said, my voice cracking. She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that caught me off guard. Perhaps your emotional bonds are not as illogical as I once thought. For the first time since she'd arrived, I felt like we weren't just two people stuck in a strange situation. We were something more. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. The morning started with an unfamiliar hum resonating through the air. Isara, usually unshakable in her aloof confidence, stood outside the hut, staring at the sky with a tense expression. They're coming, she said simply. Who? I asked, already dreading the answer. My people, she replied, her voice devoid of the humor that usually punctuated her remarks. They've detected my signal. They will retrieve me. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Relief? Sadness? Panic? Probably all three. That's good, right? You'll get to go home. She didn't respond immediately, her glowing markings dimmer than usual. Home is complicated. Before I could press her for details, the sky broke open with a low rumble. A sleek silver ship descended, its design so advanced it made her crashed pod look like a rusty can. It landed with eerie precision on the beach, the sand kicking up in neat, symmetrical ripples. The hatch opened, and out stepped three aliens who looked like Isara but somehow even more otherworldly. Their postures were rigid, their expressions cold. One of them scanned the area, eyes narrowing when they landed on me. This is the primitive species you've been fraternizing with? The tallest one asked, his voice dripping with disdain. He has proven resourceful, Isara said, stepping in front of me like she was shielding me from their judgment. Resourceful? The alien sneered. He's an organic anomaly. A relic from a backward planet. I opened my mouth to defend myself but quickly shut it when the alien gave me a look that could have melted steel. Isara folded her arms, her glow intensifying slightly. He is more capable than you give him credit for. And this planet is not as backward as you think. The tallest alien scoffed. You've always had a tendency to romanticize inferior systems, Isara. That's why you were deemed problematic. Problematic? The word hung in the air like a weight. I glanced at her, but she avoided my gaze. What does he mean by that? I asked, my voice low. Isara hesitated, then finally spoke. I was left behind because I refused to conform to their standards. To them, individuality is a defect. I disagreed. My stomach sank. So, they abandoned you on purpose? It was deemed an efficient resolution, the tall alien said, completely unbothered by the accusation. That's messed up, I said, anger bubbling to the surface. She's not some broken piece of equipment you can just toss aside. The alien ignored me, turning back to Isara. Your time here is over. Return to the ship. We will debrief and determine your future utility. Isara didn't move. Instead, she glanced at me, her expression unreadable. I have found utility here. The alien's glowing eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I'm implying that I do not wish to return, she said firmly. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The aliens exchanged unreadable glances before the tall one stepped closer to her. You would choose this primitive over the perfection of your own kind? Yes, she said, her voice unwavering. Why? Isara turned to me, and for the first time, her expression softened. Because he understands something you never will. That imperfection is not a flaw. It's what makes existence meaningful. I felt my heart skip a beat, and I was pretty sure my face turned redder than the setting sun. The tall alien looked like he'd swallowed something sour. This is absurd. Illogical. Emotional. Maybe that's the point, Isara said, stepping closer to me. The aliens didn't seem to know how to respond to that. After a tense silence, the tallest one finally spoke. Your choice is irrational, but it is yours to make. You will not be welcomed back. I had no intention of returning, she said coolly. Without another word, the aliens turned and boarded their ship. The hatch closed, and within seconds they were gone, leaving only a faint hum in their wake. The silence that followed was deafening. You didn't have to do that, I said finally, breaking the stillness. Yes, I did, she replied, her voice steady. Your people may be primitive, but they are not without merit. And you… She paused, her glowing eyes locking onto mine. You have shown me the value of imperfection. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I settled for a week. Thanks? She smirked, her glow brightening slightly. Do not misunderstand. This is not a declaration of eternal bonding or whatever illogical ritual your species engages in. It is simply a choice. A choice, huh? I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. Yes, she said, her tone lightening. Though if you wish to continue entertaining me with your primitive antics, I will not object. I laughed, the tension finally breaking. You know, you're not exactly easy to live with. And yet you seem to manage, she replied, her smirk widening. For the first time since she'd crashed onto my island, I felt like we were on the same page, or at least in the same book. It wasn't a perfect situation, but maybe that was the point. Imperfection, after all, had its own kind of charm.